Off camera, we were talking, I've tried to make sense this week of where the United States currently stands as it relates to China in the context of technology. Earlier in the program, we spoke with David Sachs about just that. Your sense of the balance right now in closer economic cooperation with China while considering them in the technology context to continue to be an economic adversary?
Yeah, there's a lot going on when it comes to conversations in D.C. and in Silicon Valley about the United States leading in technology. And you're right, all of that is within the context of making sure that we're winning this so-called technology race with regard to China. And I think that's really important. And I think it's important also that we have a common picture and an understanding of what winning means. You referenced your interview with David Sachs yesterday, and I think he put it really well. It's market share for American technology or allied technology, ultimately trusted technology. And I think that's really important. However, the big challenge there that I think isn't talked about enough is that if you look at market share of artificial intelligence, there's a concerning trend growing with Chinese models, and specifically their open weight and their open source models, which are cheap, they're good enough. And if you look at the trend just about a year ago, 15 months ago, Chinese open source models were essentially a negligible part of world AI usage. Fast forward to 15 months later, end of 2025, all of a sudden, they're going from 1% to almost 30% of global token usage, world AI usage all of a sudden. And so they're cheaper, they're good enough, and the Chinese are very focused, not necessarily on having the best models, but on having the most used. And so I think the United States, when we're talking about Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. connecting, need to make sure that not only do we have an innovation strategy, we've also got a really big distribution strategy.
We're going to hear later in the program from someone who is a China hawk, but maybe a different definition of a China hawk. That's Vinod Khosla. The reason I wanted to talk to David Sachs about the Presidential Council of Advisors for Science and Tech is look at who's on it. Those are companies that either at one time had a big market share in China or would love to export their technology to China. With something like PCAST, is it realistic that a sitting president's thinking or the policy of the administration of the day actually gets influenced by those that are a part of it?
Yeah, I think the bridge in the conversation between those tech leaders and Silicon Valley leaders in general in Washington, D.C. has increasingly been fortified. And those conversations were happening anyway. I think PCAST and that group of advisors is now going to accelerate that. But it's not new. And that conversation and the back and forth on policy has already been taking place. And I think that's really important, and that bridge is really important. At the same time, let's not forget that we also have to keep in mind every American in between Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. when it comes to technology. They're focused on jobs, they're focused on the energy requirements and data centers being built in their backyard. So that's also really important, as are our allies, because AI ultimately is borderless. And the only way that the United States is going to lead is by working hand in hand with our allies as well.
Let's go back to Iran. We said that when the president travels to China, depending on where we are in that process, they will likely discuss the war in Iran. Why does it matter, quickly, that the U.S. get China's view on this?
Well, I think, look, they're one of the leading economies. They have a lot to do with our own economy, oil prices and things like that. And so, making sure that we're on the same page is good for American strategy. And I'd say, we're seeing a big role that technology is playing in Iran as well. And so all of that is part of American technological leadership and dominance and ultimately bringing this war to a victorious end as soon as possible.